The lock had been changed. I stood on the porch of the house I had lived in for 22 years, my key turning uselessly in the deadbolt, the November wind cutting straight through my coat. I had just come from the hospital. My father-in-law had passed at 6:14 that morning, and I had held his hand until it went still. I had spoken to the nurse. I had signed the paperwork. I had driven home alone because my husband had said he needed to make some calls, and I had thought nothing of it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the keyhole like it owed me an explanation. Then my husband opened the door from the inside. He was already dressed, tie and everything. Behind him, in my living room, sat my brother-in-law and his wife, and a man I had never seen before with a leather briefcase resting on his knees. "Come in," my husband said, and the way he said it, like he was inviting a neighbor, not his wife of 31 years, told me everything I needed to know about what was coming. I just didn't know the shape of it yet. I came inside. I did not take off my coat. 7 years before that morning, my father-in-law had a stroke. It was moderate, the doctors said. He would recover much of his function with time and therapy, but he would need help. Consistent, daily, patient help. And the question that hung over every family dinner for about 3 weeks was, who? My brother-in-law lived 40 minutes away. His wife worked full-time. They had 2 kids in middle school. My husband worked in insurance, managed a team, traveled 2 weeks out of every month. And I had recently taken early retirement from my job as a physical therapist 30 years, a bad knee of my own, and a buyout package I didn't have to think too hard about accepting. I want to be honest about what happened next. Nobody asked me outright. It was more like the conversation just kept circling back to me, like water finding the lowest point. I was the one with the flexible schedule. I was the one with the medical background. I was the one who had always been close with my father-in-law, who had always called him by his first name, who had always sat with him after Sunday dinners talking about baseball in the old neighborhood while everyone else drifted to the kitchen. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. I want to say I said it freely, and I want to believe that's true. But I also remember the silence in the room when I said it, the way everyone's shoulders dropped just slightly, the way my brother-in-law said, "That's great. That's really the best situation," and then reached for more bread. I remember thinking, nobody pushed back very hard, did they? But I loved him. That part is just true. My father-in-law was a quiet man with a dry sense of humor and an opinion about everything, and the grace to keep most of those opinions to himself. He had always treated me like I belonged in the family from the first Christmas I came to dinner, 20-some years before. When he shook my hand goodbye that night, he had held on for an extra second and said, "I hope you come back." I had. I always had. So I became his caregiver. For 7 years, I managed his medications, 14 of them at the peak, sorted into a weekly pill organizer I restocked every Sunday night. I drove him to physical therapy 3 times a week for the first 2 years, then to his cardiologist, his neurologist, his primary care. I learned to cook low sodium, and I learned which shows he liked, and I learned that he needed 20 minutes alone with his coffee every morning before he wanted to talk to anyone, a fact his own son of 30-some years apparently did not know. My husband came home on weekends when he wasn't traveling. My brother-in-law's family came for Thanksgiving and Easter. His wife once brought a casserole and left it on the counter without a note. In year 4, my father-in-law had a second, smaller stroke. He lost some language. He would stop mid-sentence, reach for a word that wasn't there, and I learned to wait, quietly, without finishing his sentences for him, because he hated that. He told me once, on a good day, that I was the only one who waited. "Everyone else jumps in," he said. "Like they're embarrassed for me. You just wait." "I've got nowhere to be," I told him. He laughed at that. It was one of my favorite sounds. In year 6, he stopped being able to manage the stairs reliably. We converted the den on the main floor into his room. I was the one who moved his things, who figured out which lamp he wanted, who made sure his chair was angled so he could see both the television and the window. His son, my husband, helped carry the furniture. That took about 2 hours on a Saturday. Then my husband flew to Denver on Monday. In year 7, things got harder. He needed help bathing. He needed help with meals. There were nights he was confused and frightened, nights I sat on the edge of his bed at 2 in the morning just so he wouldn't be alone in it. There were days when he knew exactly where he was and who I was, and we talked for an hour about nothing important, and those were the best days. There were days he thought I was his late wife, and I would answer to that too, because what was the harm? I gave up my book club. I gave up the yoga class I had been going to for 11 years. I gave up the long weekends I used to take with my sister, who lived in Arizona, who I now saw once a year if we were lucky. I gave up the version of retirement I had imagined, the slow mornings, the travel, the reclaiming of my own time. I don't say this so that anyone feels sorry for me. I made those choices. I would make them again. I just want you to understand what was in the room with me when I walked into my living room that November morning and saw my brother-in-law sitting in my armchair like he owned it. "Sit down, please," the man with the briefcase said. I looked at my husband. He was standing slightly apart from the other three, which I registered but didn't understand yet. I sat. The man introduced himself as an attorney. He said he had been retained to handle the estate of my father-in-law. He said that a will had been prepared, that it was legally executed, and that he was there to communicate its contents. My brother-in-law's wife was looking at her hands. My brother-in-law was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully blank. The attorney opened his briefcase. "The house," he said, "would pass to my husband and my brother-in-law in equal shares, as the two sons and sole heirs. The savings accounts I later learned there was approximately $340,000 would be divided the same way. There was a separate bequest for me." He paused there. I think the pause was unintentional, just a man reading a document, but it landed the way pauses do when you're waiting for something that will change your life. "To Carol," he read, "who cared for me with patience and kindness for 7 years. I leave the sum of $8,000 as a token of my gratitude for her service." Service. The word sat in the room. I heard my brother-in-law exhale. His wife reached over and touched his arm. "There's one more item," the attorney said. He cleared his throat. "The family home, which will be jointly owned by both sons upon my passing, is understood to be the primary residence of my son and his wife. It is the wish of the family that any changes to that living arrangement be handled with appropriate consideration." He closed the folder. "Appropriate consideration," my husband said, and he finally looked at me, and I saw something on his face that was not quite guilt but was in the same neighborhood. "We've talked about this. The house needs to be sold. My brother and I need to liquidate the asset to settle some things. We think it's best if—" "How long?" I said. He blinked. "How long do I have?" My brother-in-law spoke then. "We were thinking 30 days would be—" "30 days," I said. "Carol." My husband took a step toward me. I know this is hard, but you have to understand the financial situation. With Dad gone, the carrying costs alone—" "I need to use the restroom," I said. I got up. I walked down the hallway. I went into the bathroom and I ran the cold water and I put my wrists under it the way I used to tell patients to do when they needed to calm down quickly. I looked at myself in the mirror. 63 years old. 31 years married. 7 years of my life given to a man who just died this morning, and I had not even had a chance to sit down and grieve before. I turned off the water. I thought about what I knew. Legally. I had been a physical therapist, not an attorney, but I had 31 years of marriage, and I was not without common sense. I knew that I had property rights as a spouse. I knew that my husband could not simply remove me from our marital home without a divorce proceeding. I knew that what was happening in my living room was not, strictly speaking, legally coherent. I also knew that I did not want to fight. Not today. Not with my father-in-law not yet cold. I dried my hands. I went back to the living room and I picked up my purse from the chair. "I'll have my sister's number for you by the end of the week," I said to my husband. "You can have your attorney contact her." He looked confused. "Contact her for what?" "To discuss the marital asset division," I said. "Since apparently we're doing this." The attorney's expression shifted slightly, in a way that suggested he had perhaps not been fully briefed on all relevant details. I walked to the front door. My brother-in-law started to say something and I didn't wait for it. I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me, and I walked to my car, and I sat in it for approximately 4 minutes, doing nothing at all. Then I called my sister. "I want to tell you about the key before I tell you what happened next." 3 weeks before he died, my father-in-law had a very good afternoon. It was a Sunday. My husband was traveling. We had watched a football game together, which neither of us cared about particularly, and then the afternoon light had come in low and gold through the window, and he had been very quiet for a while. In that way he sometimes was. Not confused, just thinking. He asked me to get him the tin from the top shelf of the closet. I knew the tin. It had been there for years. I had always assumed it was personal letters, photos, the kind of private things that accumulate over a life. I had never touched it. I brought it to him and he held it in his lap for a moment. Then he took my hand with his good hand. The right side had always been a little stronger, and he pressed something small and hard into my palm. A key. Small, brass, the kind that opens a safe deposit box. First National on Clement Street, he said. Slowly, carefully, because words cost him more now. Box 118. It's yours. When I'm gone, I looked at the key. You don't need to tell anyone, he said. I wanted to ask him what was in it. I wanted to ask him why, but I had learned, over 7 years, that he said what he meant and not a word more, and that questions sometimes exhausted him in a way that showed on his face. Okay, I said. You were good to me, Carol. He squeezed my hand once and let go. Better than I deserved, better than most. You were easy to be good to, I told him, which was sometimes true and sometimes an enormous lie, but it was what he needed to hear. He smiled. Liar, he said, and he laughed, and I laughed. And that was the last real conversation we had, because 2 weeks later he was in the hospital and he didn't come home. I stayed with my sister for 8 days. She lived 90 minutes away, in a small house with a guest room and a very opinionated cat and the kind of no-nonsense love that older sisters specialize in. She fed me soup and she let me sleep and she listened to the whole story in one long sitting, and when I was done she said, "So what do you actually want to do about this?" "I don't know yet," I said. "You have rights," she said. "Marital rights. He can't just—" "I know," I said. "But I need to think about what I want those rights to look like, whether I want to fight for the house or whether I want to make him buy me out. Either way, you call an attorney. Either way, I call an attorney." But first, I called First National Bank on Clement Street. I drove there on a Tuesday morning. I brought the key and my ID and the death certificate, which I had obtained a copy of from the hospital. The woman at the bank was kind. She walked me back to the vault room and found box 118, and she left me alone there, the way they do. I stood with the key in my hand for a moment. I thought about the way he had pressed it into my palm. You don't need to tell anyone. The simplicity of it. The trust. I opened the box. Inside there was an envelope, sealed, with my name on it in his handwriting, cramped and effortful the way it had become in his last years. There was also a folded document and a small stack of papers held together with a binder clip. I opened the envelope first. The letter inside was dated 14 months earlier. He must have had someone help him write it, because it was longer and more fluid than he could have managed on his own by that point. But the voice was his. "Carol, I have had a lot of time to think, which is what happens when you get old and slow down whether you want to or not. I have been thinking about what is fair. You gave up 7 years of your life for me. I watched you do it. I watched you give up things you never mentioned out loud, which is more generous than most people understand how to be. I watched my son let you do it while he lived his life, and I watched my other son not even pretend to help, and I have not said anything, because I am not a man who finds it easy to say certain things. But I want you to know that I saw it. All of it. Every Sunday with the pill organizer. Every 2 a.m. Every appointment. I saw it. The attorney handling this box is not the one my sons know about. He is a separate arrangement. The document in this envelope is a deed. The property at 412 Wellesley Road has been in my name alone since I purchased it in 1987, before my son and I were ever married. It is separate property. I have deeded it to you directly, outside the will. It is a small house. It has been rented for years. The tenant is month to month. It needs some work, but it is yours, free and clear, and no one can take it from you. The attorney's name and number are on the card inside. He is expecting your call. I am sorry I did not say these things to you out loud. Some of us only know how to show things. I hope this shows you enough. With love and gratitude, your father-in-law. I read it twice. Then I sat in that small bank vault room with the door open and the fluorescent light humming above me, and I cried. Not the complicated kind of crying I had been doing for 8 days, the wrung-out, exhausted, humiliated kind. This was different. This was the kind of crying that happens when something you needed to hear finally reaches you, even if it reaches you too late, even if the person who wrote it can't hear you crying. I cried because he had seen me. That was all. He had seen me. And he had wanted me to know, and somehow that was the thing that mattered most. I called the attorney the next morning. His name was Robert Finch, and he had a small practice in the Sunset District and a patient manner, and he had known my father-in-law for 30 years. He confirmed everything in the letter. The deed to 412 Wellesley Road had been filed 3 months earlier. It was mine. It had been transferred outside the estate entirely, which meant it was not subject to the will, not subject to my husband's claims, not something anyone could contest easily. "Your husband may try," Mr. Finch said, "but the property predates the marriage. It was held in your father-in-law's name alone, and the transfer was made while he was of sound mind. The documentation is solid." "What about the will?" I asked. "The $8,000. The will is valid," he said. "Your father-in-law made a clear-eyed decision about what to put in it and what to handle separately. The $8,000 was, I think, intentional." "What do you mean?" "I think he wanted the will to look the way it looked," Mr. Finch said, "so that anyone contesting the deed would have a harder time arguing he didn't intend it." I sat with that for a moment. "He was smarter than people gave him credit for," I said. "Most people are," said Mr. Finch. I also called a family law attorney that week. Her name was Patricia Souza, and she had an office downtown, and she did not waste my time. She told me that my husband could not unilaterally remove me from our marital home without a formal divorce proceeding, that I had property rights as his spouse, and that the conversation in my living room had been, from a legal standpoint, largely theater. "He can ask you to leave," she said. "You can decline. Then he has to file. He might file. He might. Is that what you want?" I thought about that. 31 years. The version of my husband I had married quieter, kinder, more present than he had become. The version of my husband who had stood in my living room in his tie and watched a stranger read me out of my own home, who had not said one word on my behalf. "Yes," I said. "I think it might be." The divorce took 13 months. I won't pretend it was easy or clean, or that I emerged from it unmarked. 31 years of a marriage, even a marriage that has lost its shape, doesn't end without leaving something behind. There were days I grieved the life I'd thought I was living. There were days I was just angry. A clean, bright anger that felt almost energizing. There were days I was neither. My husband, to his eventual credit, did not fight very hard. I think he knew, once Patricia Souza sent her first letter, that the legal ground beneath him was not what he'd imagined. I think he also knew, somewhere below the decisions he'd made in that living room, that he had done a thing that could not be undone. We divided the marital assets equitably. I took my share and put it in a savings account. My brother-in-law and his wife sold the family home. I don't know what they got for it. I don't particularly want to know. I moved to 412 Wellesley Road in the spring. The tenant had moved out by then. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with original tile, a kitchen that needed new appliances. The backyard was overgrown in a way that was either charming or a problem, depending on your mood. A Japanese maple in the far corner had gone mostly untouched for years and had grown into something quietly spectacular. I stood in the backyard the first evening with a cup of coffee and looked at that tree for a long time. The neighborhood was quiet. There was a hardware store 2 blocks away and a public library 4 blocks in the other direction. My sister drove up and helped me paint the living room on a Saturday in April, and we argued about the color in a comfortable, low-stakes way. And she stayed for dinner, and we sat on the back porch until it got cold, and she said, "You seem like yourself again." I thought about that. "I think I'm becoming someone I haven't been in a while," I said. "Maybe not myself exactly. Someone a little further along." She refilled my glass. "That counts," she said. "I still think about him. My father-in-law. More than I expected to, or maybe exactly as much as I should. I think about the 2 a.m. sittings, which felt endless when they were happening and feel like something else now, something I'm glad I was present for. I think about the slow Sunday afternoons with the football game neither of us cared about. I think about the way he laughed when I called myself a liar. I think about the fact that he spent the last months of his life quietly arranging things, carefully, with a kind of love that didn't need to announce itself. I have a photograph of him on the windowsill in the living room. It was taken years ago, before the strokes, before everything. He's squinting slightly into the sun, and he looks like a man who knows something and isn't going to tell you what it is. I like that photograph. I talk to it sometimes, which is maybe eccentric, but seems like a reasonable use of a Tuesday morning. I planted things in the backyard this year. Tomatoes, which were ambitious and only partially successful. Herbs, a rose bush near the fence that came back more vigorously than I expected after a hard winter. My knee still bothers me. I do my own PT, which is funny in a way that I'm the only audience for. I walk every morning, 2 miles, the same route, and I have become nodding acquaintances with several dogs in the neighborhood whose names I know better than their owners. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a house I did not expect to have. I am, most days, steadier than I have felt in a very long time. There is a particular quality to a life that is genuinely your own. I didn't know I'd been missing it until I found it again. It's something about the specific weight of your own decisions, the specific quiet of a house where nothing needs to be managed or maintained for someone else's comfort. The way mornings can be slow when they belong only to you. I am not without grief, or without regret, or without the particular loneliness of a life rearranged, but I am also not without that Japanese maple in the corner of my yard, which turns a color in October that stops me every time. He knew I'd like it. I'm almost certain of that now. He knew I'd end up here, in this backyard, with this tree, and he wanted me to have it. Some people love you in the ways they can. I have learned, in the last year, to be grateful for that, to take it in fully, even when it arrives late, even when it arrives from someone who is no longer there to see you. Receive it. I put my coffee down on the porch railing. The maple is still bare this time of year, just branches against the morning sky. But it's March now, and things are coming back.